Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. Today we are going to get into absolutely one of the most useful trees in herbal medicine. No, it's a useful tree any way you look at it. As a wood carver, I use birch a lot. I mean, birch is like the go-to for carving wooden spoons and bowls and cups and all the kinds of stuff that I carve. In the Scandinavian tradition, which is really it's what informs a lot of the traditional wood carving. Birch is like the wood, and it's really nice to carve. It carves easily. It's got a beautiful grain, nice color patterns. There are only um, well, there's 16 varieties of birch which have been used medicinally, and these are very medicinal plants. By the way, you're going to really want to know these. In my region, gray birch is naturalized. Um, I think native we have mountain paper birch, river birch. Yeah, we got a lot of river birch, the silver birch. You're gonna find birches. They're not that hard. So, like I said, birch has long use in herbal medicine, but it's also been used to make beverages for a very long time. Um, you can tap a birch tree the same way you would a maple tree. You can gather the syrup and you can make syrup out of it. You can make birch syrup. You can also either cook it down a little bit or just leave it as raw sap and make a beer out of it. It's got just the right amount of water to sugar, and all it needs is a little yeast. So yeasts are in the air and in the environment, so it'll make itself. Why would you do that? Well, one, it's a very pleasant beverage. Birch beer, our founders, our pioneers, I mean, they lived on birch beer. The water wasn't necessarily clean, or they didn't know if the stream they were drinking out of was safe. They could make birch beer. But the medicinal aspect of it, it has a wintergreen type flavor. It also has natural salicins or aspirin type compounds in it, which would help with muscle and joint pain and help with fevers. So, really, in early America, birch beer was almost absolutely necessary for survival. I mean, you would normally make a low alcohol beer, so people would sip on it throughout the day. Um, that's probably where people got the idea to do root beers and such. They weren't using the roots of birch, but they would add some sassafras, they'd add some sarsaparilla to the base that was birch, and they had a medicinal drink that would help with their immune system and make life a little bit more pleasant. So, I mean, really very important. You can also make a very strong birch beer, and that probably became more popular as people got kind of settled in and they weren't moving around quite so much. But in the wintertime, those strong birch beers were really popular in New England to help stave off the cold and warm you up and make you feel better. Really, and they are actually quite good for you. Birch leaves, twigs, buds, and shoots are used medicinally. Birch is anti-inflammatory and helps break a fever. Like I said, it has salicins in it. It stimulates bile, so it's good for the liver and gallbladder, good for pre-diabetic conditions and such. The bark's astringent, the sap's diuretic, which means it helps remove excess fluids from the body. The shoots are laxative. So birch has been used for fevers, colds, to aid in digestion, for skin conditions such as eczema and psoriasis, rheumatism and gout, fluid retention, kidney stones, wounds, and sores. So it's really, I mean, our ancestors, whether here in America or in England, certainly Scandinavia, I mean, the birch was like probably one of the two or three most important plants in their entire culture. So at least by 1600s England, it was starting to be recorded in British herbal medicine. I mean, it's been used since Pliny talked about it in ancient Greece, and like I said, huge tradition from Norway, Sweden, into Poland and Ukraine and Russia. We'll get into all that, but Culpeper said that A tea essentially made from the leaves was very good for kidney and bladder stones, and also as a wash for sore mouths. Miss Grieve in the 1930s England, so skipping ahead a few centuries, um, said that an infusion of the bark of birch tea was good for gout, rheumatism, dropsy, that's edema essentially, and recommended as a reliable solvent of the stone of the kidneys. With the bark, they resolve and resist putrefaction. I think she was saying the leaves and the bark could be used. A decoction of them is good for bathing skin eruptions and is serviceable in dropsy. The oil is astringent and is employed for its curative effects in skin affections, especially eczema, and is also used for some internal maladies. The inner bark is bitter and astringent and has been used in intermittent fevers. Those would be like malarial type fevers. Birch is really good for fevers, not just because of the salicin, but because of those bitter properties and such. Sap is diuretic. In the Irish tradition, John Kehoe tells us that the liquid that is drained off this tree in the springtime, this is sap, is good for dispelling urinary disorders like stones, pains, and bleeding. Decoction of the leaves when drunk is considered good for scurvy. Another very important use of this tree. Scurvy really plagued our ancestors. They didn't know that they needed vitamin C, and in the wintertime they didn't have a lot of plants with vitamin C, and they get rashes and their teeth would get loose, and it was pretty bad. A lot of people died from scurvy. So again, that beer made from birch was a lifesaver, especially in the northern areas where you had longer winters. Brother Aloysius in the we'll get a couple here from the German folk medicine tradition. Brother Aloysius, Father Kunzel, my friend Jolanta Wistib, with whom I wrote a book. Yeah, well, let's talk about a little bit of the German tradition, because they made Kunzel was Swiss, Brother Aloysius, I think, was Swedish. These were very important trees to them. Brother Aloysius said the bark is bitter and astringent, the leaves are hot, desiccant and solvent, and stimulative to the appetite. It is recommended for dropsy. A decoction of the leaves and bark and thin twigs from about 1 cup to 1 cup of the plant material to 2 cups of water, make a strong tea essentially out of it. Was good for people who suffered from nerves or dropsy, and they should take 1 to 2 cups per day. Father Kunzel, he said, and I love the way he writes, Jolanta and I, we wrote the only, to my knowledge, existent English translation of Father Kunzel's book from the 1920s, The Herbs and Weeds of Father Johann Kunzel. It's arguably the most important book in herbal medicine of the last few hundred years, because when the Nazis were taking over, they tried to outlaw herbal medicine. They're socialists, they're bureaucratic, they're communists, essentially fascists. They wanted these big government bureaucracies where only people with college degrees and medical licenses by approved boards could practice medicine. And Father Kunzel, a very feisty but poor Swiss priest, was charged with practicing medicine without a license. And he went before the courts and proved that his herbs were more effective than the doctor's pharmaceuticals. Had that not happened, herbal medicine would probably have been made illegal throughout the Western world. And, American politicians were very sympathetic to the Nazis. So were the English politicians. The British royal family, they were pure full Nazi. I mean, really, the house of my ancestors come from the House of Wessex, very different English royal family than, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles and all that. They're actually German, so they were very on board with Hitler. They would have absolutely sold Europe out had Winston Churchill allowed them. And in America, Wilson and FDR and the progressives were even worse. And yeah, they totally wanted to outlaw herbal medicine. And one brave Swiss priest went to court and got herbal medicine declared legal in Europe which is one of the main reasons it was never made fully illegal in America, even though in beginning about 1912, 1916, they began to regulate it through the Pure Foods and Drugs Act, etc. So, really important guy. A great honor for me to be able to work with that Austrian herbalist to write that book. Check it out if you like. It's the Herbs and Weeds of Father Johann Kunzel by Judson Carroll and Jolanta Wittib. So he wrote, "The man from the icy land particularly liked the birch with its fine, delicate foliage, which playfully moved in the wind. The Dane, the Danish man, explained to him that there are forests full of birch which is very healthy to sojourn. The leaves are a delicious medicine for urine ailments. The sap of the tree is useful against edema. Continued consumption of birch leaves, that would be Betula alba, white birch in other words, boiled with wine, drunk in the morning and evening, helps against edema. If your rheumatism has not appeared all of a sudden, but has already been there for years, or you're 60 or more years old, take a full herbal bath on one day and take juniper on the next. Drink daily tea from birch leaves, meadowsweet, spiny rest taro, and lady's bedstraw, and take a sip about every hour, and you can be cured in 3 to 6 weeks of severe chronic arthritis. It's very important to know. It's a very old cure. You may be aware of like the Scandinavian and Russian traditions of the saunas, and they use birch a lot in those saunas. It's considered to be very good for arthritic conditions. He said that depending on the depth and length of your illness, you could be cured in 3 to 6 weeks. I have seen 70-year-old people suffering and distorted from gout who got cured after having undergone this treatment in the spa building near Sargans, Switzerland. So, very, very important to the Nordic, the Scandinavian, the northern people of Europe is the birch tree. And Jolanta, my co-author, wrote in her commentary to this section. She's from Austria. She said, "I love birch trees. They're so beautiful with their white trunks and the shade they cast, the light shivering of the leaves in a light breeze on a hot summer day. They are very pretty trees. It's also where we find the chaga mushroom. It grows on birch, so I always make sure to look for them in winter." She says it's a very robust tree, a pioneer tree. We're the first to start growing after avalanches, mudslides, volcanic eruptions, etc. Birch is so generous, and we are given so much from the birch: saps, buds, leaves. Sap is my favorite. Every second spring, I am waiting for that moment when I can drill a small hole in the body of my birch tree, insert a straw into it, and then enjoy the sap. Cold, slightly sweet. I take a few liters from the tree during a period of 5 to 7 days and then close the hole so that the leaves have enough water and minerals. My day's portion is about 50 grams on an empty stomach, as I want to get the most of it. The rest I keep in the fridge. It would stay fresh a day, but then it starts fermenting. I freeze the rest, and it will be there for next year. I do not exploit my tree. She says I use birch water for boosting my immune system, for more energy, which I sometimes lack in the spring. Birch water has many useful minerals and is used for skin and hair. Every man in German-speaking countries would know birch water against hair loss and dandruff. I collect birch buds around the same time when I enjoy the sap. The right time is when the tops of the buds turn green. I cut a few twigs, dry them, brush the buds, powder them in a coffee grinder, and store them in a jar. The powdered buds are used in salad, soups, bread, and are added to my morning herbal infusion. I use the buds for strengthening my immune system and for detoxification. And then comes the soft spring leaves. They are part of my salad, or I just eat the leaves now and then when I pass a birch tree. Very good wild edible. We don't really think of it that way in America, but in Austria and on up, they do. She says, towards summer, I collect birch leaves, the young and healthy ones. These I dry for my detox mixtures. They are mildly diuretic, and for anti-inflammatory mixtures. And then I leave my birch tree in peace until next spring. Now, turning to America, Dr. Samuel Thompson in the early 1900s wrote of black birch, Betula lynchia. He specifically used the bark. He said, a tree of this bark is useful in curing all complaints of the bowels to remove obstruction. It is also of use in dysentery. This tree with peach meats or cherry stone meats made into a syrup is an excellent article to restore patience after having been reduced